This is Jeff Mucci with RCR Wireless News, and welcome to this week's edition of Coders on Good Friday. We have special guest Victor Agreda, and we're also going to have a second special guest who has real experience on developing programs on Apple's Swift programming language. But before we dive into today's show, let's jump into and recognize our sponsors, Telecom Careers. So if you need software development talent, make sure to check out Telecom Careers. So let's run the segment.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board. telecomcareers.com.
Victor, thanks for joining us again this week. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And for those who don't know Victor Agreda, he was the editor-in-chief of 2AW. He's also executive producer of Superpixel Studios and Angry Dad. Dad Gamer. He has a nightly show on that he broadcasts to Twitch TV. Victor, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest?
Well, this is Dave Veranu, and he is a co-founder and actually development lead at Nickelfish and at Derby, actually, right?
That's correct.
That's right. And so I actually met him through a friend, Seth Clifford, who is a developer as well. And as I understand it, Dave has been working exclusively, I think, with Swift programming lately.
That is also correct.
So I'm interested, Dave, because we had talked a little bit about Objective-C and Swift and whatnot, but you're really just doing Swift programming, and this is something that, first of all, I guess we should take a step back and go ahead and tell people what Swift is to begin with.
Sure. What is Swift? Swift is a new programming language from Apple, and it's essentially going to be the replacement for Objective-C. It's meant to be nice and concise and more readable and easier to use than Objective-C. All things that that I find to be true. I really enjoy using Swift, and it's what's going to be powering the Apple platforms going forward.
And that includes the Mac, the iPhone, and now the Watch. Now, Objective-C, of course, was an object-oriented programming languages, like many modern programming languages. Not all of them are object-oriented, and so Apple went with that same concept with Swift, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's certainly object-oriented and certainly shares a lot of the same patterns as Objective-C, and I think the focus is really on making it a much easier and expressive language and keeping things as concise as possible.
And that's sort of what's interesting to me, is that they've made it easier, but they have to maintain the same power. And this is always the thing that people talk about in software development, is that you can have something really powerful, but to make it easy to use, it's this struggle between power and ease of use. So I'm curious with two things. First of all, in your experience, just seeing other people who come from other object-oriented languages, knowing this is very new, of course, how easy has it been to them to transition into working with Swift? And then the other thing is, I mean, how easy is Swift for someone with no programming experience to come into it?
I think it's pretty easy to jump into for both sides of that coin, particularly because it's pretty well documented, even for being a very new language. And certainly this is more true over the past handful of months. It's pretty well documented by Apple. So and the documentation is also nice and easy and concise. So you're not looking at 800 different pages over 20 different websites to try and figure out this language. It's pretty easy to learn from that aspect. So that kind of helps both sides out, whether you're familiar with object-oriented languages already and just are learning new syntax and some new methods of doing things, the technical documentation. And then from the new programmer aspect, they also have some introductory documentation, tutorials, things of that nature to help anyone out jumping on the Swift train.
Now, one thing that actually caught my eye at WWDC when they announced this was something that I hadn't seen, at least in the context of what we would call like a grown-up language. I've seen this in some sort of playground type languages, and I say that specifically because there is a playground, right? Basically, let you see your code as you're writing it. So, can you explain a little bit of that to people?
Sure. Yeah, what playgrounds are is exactly what you just said. It's an area where you can, within Xcode, write some Swift code, and in a sidebar see what that code is actually producing, and that's particularly helpful for a compiled language like Swift, where you can test something out and then not have to take the time to compile it, whether into a simulator or a device, and take that extra time to see if the code that you just changed is doing what you want it to do. So it's really a great feature for a compiled language to be able to write something and see instantaneous results. Definitely helps speed the process up of development.
Yeah, I know it's helped my son, who isn't even a teenager yet, who immediately got the free iBook from Apple, the iBook on Swift, the language, the documentation, which was written extremely well. And then you're able to, of course, download Xcode for free, and you can try it out. And he was able to use Playground to actually see everything. So it seems like that if you have no background, that actually is extremely useful to be able to immediately see what you're doing, so you can apply the lessons. And there's none of this sort of like, well, wait, what am I to do? And all those other considerations. Just focus really on the code.
Absolutely.
Well, for the Victor, for the uninitiated, what I'd like to do is just maybe have our team pull up the Swift website, and they talk about it being the innovative new programming language for Cocoa and Cocoa Touch. What is Cocoa and what is Cocoa Touch?
I'll let Dave actually explain that, because he's living that every single day, right?
Yeah. So I'll oversimplify it. It's Cocoa and Cocoa Touch are what are the APIs that power OS 10 and iOS. So they're what allow you to take Swift code and integrate with the displays, the interfaces to actually present your application. So that's Cocoa and Cocoa Touch is what you're actually working with. Well, I think what we need to keep in mind with Swift, as great a programming language as it is, it's still just a programming language. We're still dealing with the APIs of iOS and OS 10, and that's what you need to work with. So whether you're working with Objective-C or Swift, it's the knowledge of those APIs and how you use them and how you implement them that is really the backbone of an Apple developer.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, to explain it another way is that if you see two apps that do the exact same thing, and one app has the built-in animations that iOS provides, especially the new stuff in iOS 7 and 8, if you're seeing that stuff versus another app, let's say it's a to-do app, and you're seeing none of those, it's just, you click a button and something changes, and it just feels like it could be on a Palm Trio from, 10 years ago. That's someone who's not familiar with those APIs, and they're not using the power that Apple's giving them in those frameworks to be able to do those things. So that built-in power is really where the Cocoa stuff is. And then Swift is your code that you're using to interface and tell it what to do with those things, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
so again, for the layperson or person, the uninitiated to Swift, going back to the website, they talk about it being interactive and fun and concise syntax. They also talk about running lightning fast and Swift code running side by side with Objective-C. So when they talk about lightning fast, what does that really mean? How do they make that run super fast, and how do they allow it to run side by side with Objective-C?
So I think in terms of the lightning fast, they certainly have their means of measuring things, and they tell us it's supposed to be much faster than Objective-C. We did some very, very light side-by-side comparisons and did see at least on par or slightly faster performance with Swift. But and certainly I think that's going to increase over time. I think, to be honest, I think a lot of that is coming from they started with a clean slate. It's not decades of development on Objective-C and everything that comes with it. I think anytime you have a clean slate and are able to write everything from scratch, you're going to get a performance boost out of that. So, whatever performance increase we're seeing now with a much more simplified language, whether that still holds true 10 years from now when they've added a ton more to the Swift language, we'll see if that still holds true.
Okay. Well, Dave, you wear two hats. You're Chief Product Officer for Nickelfish, which has been around since 2002, and according to your website, you guys, and I love the tagline of your manifesto, which we'll talk about in just a minute, but you're also co-founder, developer and lead developer of Derby. But why don't we pause for a minute and actually show the video of Stringer, and then you can talk about how your company moved completely away from C and went to Swift. So why don't we roll that segment?
When it comes to music, there's something special about shuffle. You rediscover things you forgot you had. You hear a song, and it takes you somewhere else. Sometimes you're already singing the next song from the album because it's just forever etched in your mind that way. Introducing Stringer, a new way to interact with the music in your life. Your shuffle is a string, and your songs are tied together, which makes sense because that's how we think about our music anyway. With Stringer, you can reconnect these songs easily and gain a totally new sense of control over your shuffle. You can add, delete, even reorder your songs on the fly, and then go right back to listening. It's flexible, easy, and really fun. Check it out. Visit heyderby.com/stringer.
So before we let Victor ask Dave the hard questions, I want to come back to Nickelfish and Dave, give people a better feel for who you are, the types of projects you've worked on, and then we're going to dig into your experience developing Stringer with Swift. So I'm going to come back to Nickelfish, and on your website it talks about deviously awesome arts and crafts. What does that really mean?
Well, our primary focus at Nickelfish is really the user experience. So while we have some of the most talented developers here at Nickelfish, what we really try to focus on that we feel not every development shop really focuses on is the design and user experience. So that's where the devilishly awesome arts and crafts come from. The focus on the design, how it looks, what's the story that this application tells, and then backing that up with just really awesome development to then launch a product that we're all proud of, both the client and us.
Well, you're based in New Jersey, and I noticed on your website you've got some really cool looking folks and a cool office. What's the culture like there, and what have you guys been doing for the years in terms of types of projects for your customers?
The culture here is great. I mean, as you can probably see from the background here, is we're not a corporate office. We actually have two very old houses, one built in 1815 in downtown Mendham, and we kind of converted those into office space. So it's very homey here. It's definitely a lot more has a family feel to it, and it's a great place to come to work every day. And through that, we feel that we get some really innovative design and development out of our folks. Mm-hmm. So we do everything software development here. We do a lot of web applications, big back-end services that integrate with mobile applications. So and pretty much any software project that any of our clients want to throw at us, we're happy to take a swing at.
Okay. And you started Derby. You're the co-founder of Derby, which produced the Stringer application we just looked at. What can you tell us, or why did you create a separate entity and to develop Stringer?
So back in early 2014, so just over a year ago, we had decided that we were going to create an offshoot company called Derby to do products, to create our own products. So Nickelfish, having been around for 13 years, has been 100% services based for clients. And I think every service-oriented development shop's dream is to write their own software where they can make their own decisions. And so that's what we decided to do. So Derby is still an environment where we take just a handful of folks and take a little bit of their time and put it towards creating products that initially we really wanted for ourselves, and then also products that we that we feel that a much wider audience would want to use. So it's kind of wear two hats here, in that we flip back and forth between building products for our product team, which is luckily funded by what we've built at Nickelfish, and then also flipping back to helping out Nickelfish to continue to grow and be able to provide the financial stability for both companies.
Okay. Well, Victor, I'm going to hand off to you. Why don't you go into a little more detail with Dave about the development of Stringer using Swift?
Sure thing. Well, first of all, I want to say I like the way that Stringer does things, and I really wish that some of the interactions that are in there were in Apple's Music app. But I could spend an hour or more ranting about my issues with Apple's Music app across platforms. But I'm interested in sort of this top level concept of just innovation in general. And how do you guys look at innovation? Because a lot of people say know that if we put something in front of a user that's completely new to them, it will be foreign, and they will have a hard time understanding, what do I do with this? How do I interact with this? Imagine if Automator had just been like a record button, right? And nothing else. So people still have to have a kind of a mental foothold on what they're doing. So when you guys innovate, I mean, do you start way out here and then dial it back? Or is it more of a let's start with the basics and then iterate on top of that?
You know what? Honestly, it kind of varies project to project. With Stringer, in particular, we kind of went to the extreme and then kind of dialed it back. And where that kind of started was we had the interface was a little bit more abstract, and I don't know if wacky is the right term, but it was definitely a little bit more. I guess it ended up being a more difficult interface to use, and we built some prototypes, and we loaded up onto a couple devices and handed it to people and watched them. We didn't say anything; we watched them use it, and some people got it, and some people had some difficulty using those initial interfaces. And as much as we liked how those worked, it's pretty clear that if 50% of the people that you hand the test device to aren't able to use your application, that's probably going to hold true or even worse, once it gets out into a much wider audience. So definitely had to go back to the drawing board and tweak a couple things. And then I think what we netted out on was an interface that is it's innovative for the music shuffle experience, but it's still pretty straightforward that anyone can pick it up and kind of figure it out.
Do you think Steve Jobs was right when he said that people don't know what they want until they see it?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly on the client side, I think that's the most difficult part. Whether it's client services or doing your own application, it's spending the time to do some prototypes and then actually seeing it in real life, and then deciding, that all those wireframes that we did and the beautiful creative, once you actually see it in living color, it maybe doesn't quite work the way that you thought it did, and you have to go back and tweak a couple things.
Well, thing too, because I've seen innovation happen in the process where a client comes to you with business goals and they say, we want to do these things, but then in the act of creating and discovering what it is they really want to do, sometimes you find a better path, right? So can you speak a little bit to the process and your experience in that, and have you found yourself in a situation where you've actually created something different than what the client maybe thought they wanted, that was actually better and exceeded their expectations?
Certainly, and every project is different. It also depends on who you're actually speaking to. If you're particularly on the client services, if you're talking to a marketing department, they're usually tend to be more open to the crazy ideas and how to convey their message. If you're talking to someone on the business side who has financial goals, they have a checklist that they need to check every item off. So maybe a little bit more stringent on what you can accomplish. But I think one of our strengths is working with our clients and really finding out what are their goals that they're trying to achieve, and kind of how can we push them to maybe to a spot where they're a little uncomfortable, but hopefully then exceed their expectations when it actually launches.
And getting that back to the developer side of things, it seems to me, and what I've heard from other people, is that using Apple's technologies allows them to actually create faster. It allows them to innovate in that iterative sense, right? Play with things, play with ideas, play with interaction models and whatnot. Have you found that to be true? And just in talking with other people and seeing, again, you're a Swift guy, but these other folks who are coming from maybe other experiences, I mean, is that something that you're hearing and seeing?
Yeah, I think certainly the ecosystem and Xcode in particular kind of lends itself to some quick prototyping. The tool set, the IDE is great. It has everything in one place so that you can quickly put something together, and with a little bit of work, get it onto a couple test devices to actually show to people. So I think that tool set lends itself to being able to prototype and show people things early, and going back to what we spoke about earlier, kind of see it in person and then go back and make changes if needed.
Yeah, one interesting thing has been Swift is well, it's just coming up on sort of its 1 year public anniversary, right?
Right.
And of course, it was in development for a few years before that at Apple, obviously, but it's still been a moving target. So can you speak a little bit to just some of the pain points that you've had? I mean, this brand new language, and we can understand that it's going to be a moving target, just like all things that are new are, especially with Apple. We know that they push really, really far, and then they have to pull it back a little bit as they refine and they make it better. But how has that been, just the growing pains in general in dealing with Swift?
You know what? It could have been a lot worse. So we had made the decision to go 100% Swift with Stringer, mainly because the timing was right. So we had gone to WWDC last year with an Objective-C prototype that we wanted to show a couple people, and particularly some of the Apple engineers, to get some feedback. And as soon as we heard the announcement for Swift, we had already decided beforehand that we were going to go back home and start from scratch. We were going to write the new production code for Stringer, and so it was a very, very easy decision to say, okay, we're going to write this in Swift because that's what Apple's doing moving forward. So the pain points really came from it being beta, and I guess some would say that it is still beta. So even the early builds of Stringer, anytime beta would come out, it would be a day or two of changing the syntax just to get the app to compile. That's less of an issue today, as it's a lot more stable. But it's still changing, it's still growing. So with every major new release, I believe it was Swift 1.2 that just came out, there's definitely some syntax that needed to change, particularly with optionals, which still trying to wrap my brain around. Syntax needed to change in order just to get it to build again. So those are the pain points of working with a new system, and particularly it's still being documented. So early on, you're trying to use an API that worked in Objective-C, and it's trying to figure out, okay, am I calling this method incorrectly, or is this API just not fully implemented? So that was definitely frustrating at a point. But by the time it was ready to be released, and they were accepting Swift applications, it was stable enough that we were comfortable in releasing our application.
What it is interesting how quickly this has moved, and how to look at the stability from day one to now is really impressive. I mean, that speaks a lot to the talent of Apple's engineers and teams, and just how hard they've been working on this. But I am interested, I mean, it's been a long time since I know I have seen a brand new language like this, come up like this. But I'm interested. There have been other things, of course, PHP and Ruby on Rails and a lot of other website stuff. The web has just exploded with all of these frameworks and other languages and whatnot. I don't know how much your experience tracks with that, but can you speak a little bit to that? Like how much is Swift tracking basically with other new things that have come out? Is it as stable as you would hope? 1 year almost?
I think considering what it is, it's very stable for only being a year old or publicly 1 year old. So certainly our application is available, and it's been available for a couple months, and it's 100% Swift, and other developers are releasing complete Swift applications all the time. So it's definitely it's certainly not perfect. Objective-C wasn't perfect, but it's certainly stable enough that Apple's willing to have those applications available in their ecosystem, and not have to worry about whether it's just going to destroy everything.
Right.
I think it also helps that it's built by Apple. It's not they're not relying on an open source community to develop the language. So that certainly helped them to get it to where it is today in probably a much shorter period of time than a new web application development language.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about in the past, Jeff. Is the open
Victor,
source.
we need to kind of wrap up here in about 5 minutes. So
Sure.
I'd like to question if you were going to the reliability and scalability 5.9s. Why don't you get one more question in? Then I've got a question or two, and then we'll look to wrap up today.
You got it. Well, yeah, and that was actually something I wanted to address. So it sounds like at this point, if I was looking to create something that required, 5.9s reliability, Swift may not be my primary choice off the bat, right? This is really much more of a customer-facing language if you're going to be writing apps for customers, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a year old, but again, it's compiled language. The compiler is going to find a lot of those errors for you. So whether it's any more or less stable than Objective-C, it's I certainly haven't built a huge enterprise application in Swift, so I couldn't speak to the stability. But I think it's certainly, if you're working on a new application, it's certainly worth a try.
Yeah, so I think that brings up a great point, Victor. We have, in previous Coder episodes, we've been talking about hyperscale and web scale versus telco scale. And then last week we had a conversation around open source and what is open source. And on a go-forward basis, I guess my question is Apple trying to create a mutually exclusive walled garden around the developer community? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, I can tell you that from my perspective, it seems like Apple moves very quickly when everything is controlled by Apple, but they are willing to obviously integrate and work with other things as needed. ResearchKit's a great example of that. Well, where they opened it up to medical researchers, knowing that those are the experts in the field. They've got a partnership with IBM to work on enterprise class stuff. So they're not completely like that, but they definitely see a value, as Dave was just talking about, in being able to move quickly if everything is controlled very, very tightly. And that's sort of their real value add in the market has been move quickly, innovate quickly, bring something to market that's very stable, and then constantly iterate it. And that's how they get ahead of the competition all the time.
And I guess Victor or Dave, either one of you guys, you talked about it being more for end user applications, but as you know, this mobile world, you see this convergence of over-the-top service providers, Facebook or Google or even Apple with FaceTime, where you've really got communication layer applications that are running on devices. And the traditional telephone companies and mobile operators are having to compete with these over-the-top guys. At the same time, they're transforming their networks. You hear terms like network virtualization and software-defined networks, and so you're seeing a transformation of these old languages and old ERP applications moving to the web. And so do you think Apple or this compiler language that they've developed in Swift can start being used deeper down the stack?
Dave?
I guess I don't see why not. It's as long as they want to make that available to whatever systems that type of software would be running on. It's a programming language. There's no reason why it wouldn't be able to be used on those types of systems.
So if you're a developer, and whether you're working in transforming existing applications or transforming network level code, or you're a development shop like nickelfish, are you starting to see a bifurcation where developer shops need to make decisions? Am I going to go 100% this way, or am I going to stick with Java or some other things?
Well, I think in what we deal with, we basically have three different kind of industries that we deal with, or not industries, but platforms. So we have the web applications that we build and backend services, and we make decisions all the time about is it going to be a LAMP stack, is it a Java application, and a lot of that tends to be what the client is asking for if they have a big IT requirement. But when you're talking about Android applications or iOS applications, you are pretty much pigeonholed into what you need to develop those on. So it's a pretty easy decision of, well, they need an iOS app. What am I going to build this in? Well, you're going to build it in either Objective-C or Swift with Xcode. But I think, certainly if you're starting on with a new application, it's a pretty easy decision to go with Swift. I think we can all assume that Apple's not going to want to maintain both Objective-C and Swift, so they're going to push Swift going forward. So you might as well get yourself situated with Swift now.
Okay. Well, we are out of time, but I do want to give a plug for Victor. Victor, you're going to be in Austin on Monday, and you're going to be broadcasting to Twitch TV your Angry Dad Gamer. So what I'd like to do is maybe bring up a slide that shows Angry Dad Gamer, and why don't you tell us a little bit about why you launched the program and what viewers can expect to see Monday night.
Absolutely. Well, we do 6 shows a week, or at least I try to do 6 shows a week. I definitely stream 6 times a week, and Twitch is a new platform, more or less. It's old Justin TV, but they pivoted, and now they do video game streaming, people playing video games and talking about them. And so what I do is I actually bring in comedians and musicians and other people, and we have a conversation while they're playing the games. And sometimes they've never played the games, so they just want to talk about, oh my gosh, what is happening right now. So it's a lot of fun. We get to engage with people when they're kind of having some fun and they're not all, stuffy with the interview format and whatnot. And it's been a lot of fun. We do different type of stuff, retro games, new games, even talk about game design sometimes.
Okay. And David, Dave, your shop, are you guys gamers?
I myself, I used to be, but 2 young kids that kind of took all my gaming time away. But we definitely have our share of gamers here.
Well, Dave, you got 3 options to watch Victor in action next week. So you've got option number 1, come on down to Austin to the world headquarters of RCR TV studio. Join us in person. Number 2, you can tune into Twitch TV, which is Twitch TV/Angry Dad Gamer. Or finally, you can come to RCR Wireless News website, and we're going to be streaming it live on our website. But gents, thanks for joining us today. Have a good weekend, and we will invite everybody back for next week's Coders. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Coders is a production of RCR TV. To reach Jeff Mucci or to suggest a show topic for Coders, you can find him on Twitter at Jeff Mucci. For all the latest news on wireless code and the whole world of wireless, check out rcrwireless.com.